Hello, my name is Niamh Brannigan. If you're a regular listener, it's lovely to have you back, and if you're a first-timer, welcome. Here on the Irish Film London podcast, we bring you all the latest and greatest talent from Irish film, TV and animation, with recordings of live Q&As and interviews from our festivals and award ceremonies, as long as a host of brand new interviews, one of which I'm delighted to bring you today. In today's episode, Gerry chats to the makers and creators of Documentary Groundswell. Activist and filmmaker Johnny Gogan joins us alongside Leitrim activist Eddie Mitchell. Groundswell chronicles the decade-long struggle of Leitrim and Fermanagh's residents as they fight against the threat of fracking in their communities. In this chat, we discuss its themes and the wider aspects of Johnny's work, along with Eddie reminding us the fight isn't over. You can catch Groundswell along with some other great shorts and documentaries on our website. Just click into Irish Film from Home and it will redirect you. The IFL podcast is completely independent, so I would ask if you enjoy yourself here today, or you enjoy popping onto our website and checking out our events and films that we put up, to consider making a donation or becoming a champion. If money is tight at the moment, even just spreading the word about us would be brilliant. Just before I hand you over, I would like to thank Culture Ireland and the Irish Emigrant Support Programme for their ongoing support for our work, including this podcast. Enjoy, folks.
So I'll start by saying hello to everyone and to thank everyone who's here for joining us tonight. Irish Film London is very lucky to be able to host Groundswell on our Irish Film from Home platform this month of May. And we're even more lucky to be joined tonight by the director of Groundswell, Johnny Gogan, and anti-fracking activist Eddie Mitchell. I hope that's a suitable tribute for you, Eddie.
Well, it's okay.
Okay, he's letting me off with anti-fracking activist. That's good. So, Eddie and Johnny, thanks very much for joining us. How are you both doing tonight?
Very good. It's been a pretty beautiful day here in Dromahair, County Leitrim, and we're kind of enjoying being kind of let out a bit more than we have been up to now. So, full of the joys. Good stuff. What about yourself, Eddie?
We're great. And we're kind of having a second winter in Leitrim. The east wind has been coming for about 2 weeks, so we're kind of wondering when it's going to change. But I think it's going to warm up.
Good stuff. Well, look, it's nice, and if it makes you feel any better, it's nice and warm in London. So
yeah, it's always
nice and warm in London by comparison to Fermanagh, Leitrim. Yeah, but look, I do come from Fermanagh, and the story of Groundswell feels pretty close to my heart. It feels pretty close to home to me because it's something I've lived through as well, in the sense that like the story of the local fight against the threat of Tamboran resources coming in and fracking the pristine environment, which is, you know, home to all of us, but also really the biggest source of tourist income in the region and a source of really natural beauty for us all. That's something that I remember very clearly and still remember, and I know that there's still some activities going on about it. So it's really, really nice to be able to have the conversation with you both, and to be able to host Groundswell and to allow more people to see it, really. So thanks both for joining us and for your contribution and bringing the film this way. I suppose I want to start off the conversation this evening by finding out a bit more about yourself as a filmmaker, first of all, Johnny, before we start talking about Groundswell itself, because it's not by any means your first film, is it?
No, it's I suppose it's actually my 10th feature film, kind of half of which are drama and the other half are documentary. So and this year is going to be sort of a fairly big year for me. It's the 30th year making films, so I've been kind of celebrating that in a quiet way. And I started out in, you know, for a film going audience, maybe it'll be interesting. I started out in Dublin with an organization called Filmbase back in the late 80s. And my first kind of entry into film was starting the magazine, the magazine that became Film Ireland for Filmbase. And then I started making films, short films, in 1990. First short film I studied, and then I kind of just moved on from there. But I suppose I've been politically active always in parallel, and the two have always been quite interlinked. At that time, in the late 80s in Ireland, in fact, the first thing I reported on for Film Ireland was the abolition of the Irish Film Board in 1987. So it seemed like, publishing a magazine that was about filmmaking, produced by filmmakers, and getting to make films in that period when essentially independent filmmaking in Ireland had been shut down, or there was an attempt to shut it down, was actually quite a political act, if you like, and quite a subversive act. And I was fortunate to kind of get to make films, a bunch of films before the Film Board was re-established in around 1993, 94. So, but even back before that, I studied politics, and I had been active in things like the anti-amendment campaign in 1983, or the so-called Right to Life campaign, and that was sort of my initiation into politics. So yeah, that's the two have always been quite interlinked. And I moved to Leitrim in 1997 to make a film actually about the border called Mapmaker, which was a thriller set in the post-ceasefire, the post-1994 kind of hiatus, if you like, and dealing with the tensions. In fact, there's a couple of extracts featured in Groundswell, but it was dealing with the kind of the aftermath of violence, but also the kind of the aftershocks of violence, if you like, in the border region. And in some ways, Groundswell fits into a kind of a series of films I've been making about the border. The second being Black Ice, which is about boy racers and girl racers, and diesel smuggling and the border as a kind of a kind of a dark land. And then this has been a factual film about, I suppose, the reality of fracking and the threat of fracking.
So like, there sounds like through Mapmaker and the way that you started your career, it sounds like that politics or that political relationship with film has fed into a lot of what you've done very clearly. I mean, do you feel that like would you go so far as to say that politics is an essential part of your filmmaking oeuvre or your style of filmmaking? Well,
I mean, going back to that kind of instinct, that at the beginning it was very much about, you see, we in Ireland, I mean, really we only made 1 or 2 feature films a year through the 1980s.
That's right, yeah.
So there was a very low output, and a lot of those films had to receive their permission from abroad because you couldn't raise finance in Ireland. So there were so many Irish stories that couldn't be told, and certainly couldn't be told from an Irish point of view for someone who actually lived and grew up in the society. It wasn't permitted to tell those stories in many ways. So for me, the instinct has always been searching out those untold stories. And some of them have been kind of more personal to me, and some of them haven't been. Like, for example, one that wasn't personal to me, but very much resonated with where my own kind of outlook on the world is the film I made about Hubert Butler, who was the human rights activist from Kilkenny who smuggled Jews into Ireland in the year before the Second World War, and who had been censored in Ireland, and who was really kind of a visionary writer, and he can more or less coined what our film is about, which is the notion of acting locally and thinking globally. So that was a story that I was able to, back in 2016, able to dig out. A lot of people knew about Hubert Butler, but no one had ever made a film about him because it was unfinanceable. And that was one of the things I found out in making it, that no one wanted to finance it. Right. And essentially I found a way of doing it because I have a great collaboration here in Leitrim with an editor, with Steve Wickham, Patrick O'Rourke, my editor, and Steve Wickham, the musician, and Niall Flynn, who are the same team of people who made this film, which nobody was prepared to finance either. So for me, it's a kind of that kind of subversion of what is permissible is at the core of my own filmmaking ethic, and that kind of feeds into the wider politics as well.
Mm. So what are your wider politics, Johnny? Like, because in the film you talk about your role as a councillor, as a Green Party councillor, am I right?
Well, as an unelected councillor, but as you know, it's impossible to get elected north of the Galway Dublin line as a Green, certainly in the northwest of Ireland. It's going to take another 10, maybe another 5 or 10 years before we see a councillor. But the maxim has always been, if you're not elected, just behave as if you are a councillor, and people will quietly kind of respect you and give you the latitude to operate in that way. So my politics would be, yes, they're environmental, but they are back to that thing of acting locally and thinking globally. But also, I mean, one of the reasons I was really attracted to living here in Leitrim and staying here after I made Mapmaker was because there's a very powerful sense of community here. It's not unique in Ireland, but it is hard to find. I think maybe there's other places down the Western Seaboard that have that, but there's very few places with the quality of, you know, that resounding sense of community that you get here. And I think that's also something that we try to capture in the film.
Well, speaking of that sense of community and the strong activism, Eddie, you're a member of that community. What was your, I mean, your sort of introduction into the world of what happened with this battle is chronicled a little bit in the film. Quite early on in the film, you're introduced as somebody who, like, he literally saw a sign on the side of the road. Is that how you were indoctrinated into the cause?
Well, that's the truth. But like, I was a very unlikely anti-fracking activist. Like, I was involved in local Fine Gael politics, which is kind of like, people have described that like a centre-right politics, you know. So we would have been supposed to be supporting fracking, you know, like we would be supporting jobs and development and industry. And so just lucky enough, we had the internet and we were able to do our own research. I was an architect. I'm an architectural technician, and I was after doing a course in energy management thing, you know, a part-time. So I thought, you know, a big, massive energy project. So I looked into it fairly quickly. I thought I'd get a job, you know, I thought it was going to be great. But that didn't last long. I mean, as soon as you research fracking and you start to consider, oh my God, this is very, very big. And then very, very serious. And then, my God, I look at all these concerns, like, you know, and then that's the beginning of realizing we have to be very careful about this, you know.
Yeah, because that was one of the selling points from Tamboran and from all these license applicants, because it wasn't just Tamboran that, if I recall correctly, that was applying for a license to frack in the region. But the promise was, because this was happening at the end of the credit crunch, as we called it, the last recession in 2007, 2008 or thereabouts, the promise was that there would be loads of jobs.
Yeah. And that sounds great, like, but if that's all you have to say, you know what I mean? If that's the only argument that you can make, then that can be very dangerous. Like, when you live in you know what Fermanagh is like. I mean, an absolutely beautiful landscape, and someone's going to drill 3,000 wells, and eventually you're going to link the place to a petroleum base, you know, permanently. I mean, you're looking at the end of life as we knew it, you know, definitely.
Well, definitely, yeah. For a person who is, or for a region, I mean, that is like so based on the tourism of its natural beauty, you know, and the idea that, you know, there's like water sports championships and World Cups and stuff taking place on the Erne, and areas of outstanding natural beauty, and, you know, geoparks and all this kind of stuff. Like, it's just sounds ridiculous to be able to say that you're going to start a petroleum based industry in the heartland of this. It doesn't make sense.
Well, it really did confront us, you know. We really hadn't. We had no vision really for our county. You know what I mean? We were just living in it. Leitrim is a poor place. We don't go shout. We're not shouting about Leitrim all the time. We're not challenging. We're quiet people who get on with our lives. But fracking has changed that for people in Leitrim. We now know that if we don't shout, like I didn't even speak at my own wedding. That's how quiet we are. Like, we really had to step up in order to take on this. And I suppose the thing about people in Leitrim is that we're connected, really connected and deeply rooted to the place. So it was, our response was like a response to a virus. It was just, we realized that we were the only people who could stop it. We had to represent the ground that we stood on.
Yeah.
And that's what we had to do. And whether we didn't expect to win, we expected to fight. And it was really about, just taking on that struggle and fighting it. And look, we won, for now at least. We haven't won in Fermanagh, but we've won in Leitrim. But that's only a half a win,
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the other thing as well, Gerry, was that there was no playbook as well as how to deal with this. And I think we tried to deal with in the film about what had happened in Corrib. But if you always have to remember the people in Corrib, and if people are familiar with the conventional gas development off the shore of the coast of Mayo, the issue there was about a pipeline and about which path the pipeline would take. It wasn't about whether the gas should be extracted or not. What we were actually saying in Leitrim was, this is not going to be extracted. This project is not going to go ahead in any shape or form, because we knew that it couldn't happen in any safe way because of the nature of shale gas. There was no safe way of extracting it. So there was no precedent in Ireland for dealing with that direct confrontation with a serious vested interest, because Tamboran were not a huge company, but we knew that what they would do is probably get to a point where they had enough licensing and that they would then sell on to a Shell or to an Exxon, who would be very, very difficult to say no to.
Oh, right. So it's not necessarily even about stopping the big demon of Tamboran resources coming in. It's about stopping the licenses going through so that the land isn't sold off to the highest bidder.
Yes, because see what happened, say, in the case of the project in Mayo, off the coast of Mayo, that was developed with by a company called Enterprise Oil, who are more or less an Irish-based company. And there's a circular thing which we can maybe refer to when we talk about Fermanagh later on. And they then sold off the interest to Shell for the final development and for the exploitation of the field. So that's what we knew we would be dealing with if the project got any traction. And also, if you're thinking the kind of wider geopolitics as well, is that the fracking industry was very well established in the United States and in North America, but it hadn't entered Europe in any big sense at that point. They were trying to get into Poland and into Germany and maybe other countries that Eddie could add to there, but they were really trying to get a foothold in Europe. So we were part of a larger strategy.
So Johnny, just for the benefit of people outside of Ireland who might listen to this, would you be able to try and summarize what happened in Mayo, what this thing is that we're referring to? Because this is the story that's covered in the Gasland documentary, right?
No, this is the thing that's covered in the documentary called The Pipe.
Ah, okay, so it's a separate issue.
So Richie O'Donnell, who made The Pipe back in about 2010, he documented confrontation between the community in Mayo and the developers of a conventional gas field off the coast of Mayo. And the community in Mayo wanted, they didn't want the gas piped into an inland refinery. They wanted to have a refinery on the shore or offshore, because they knew that it would compromise farmland, bogland. There's just the community, it would compromise the community if it was piped inland. And basically, two things. The courts found what Shell were doing was outside the law, but Shell kept on forcing the issue, and the politicians were unable to say no to Shell, because essentially they were threatened with the fact, well, if you create obstructions, we'll pull out. Now, so ultimately, Shell got its way, and the pipe went through to the refinery at Ballinaboy, and that gas now provides about 50% of Ireland's gas supply. But now, what happened in the course of that was that there was terrible division and terrible acrimony within the community, and the developers of the gas field had spread money around the community, to sports clubs, and had created a kind of a vested interest among certain aspects of the community. And so it was a kind of a divide and conquer strategy. So that we did learn that ourselves, that could be something that would happen to us. But we knew it would be impossible to have a campaign that didn't have its internal tensions. And we go into this in the film, but we knew that we would have to find a way of managing that so that our campaign did not implode. So, and that took a lot of our energy, as well as dealing with the companies and the regulators and the government. We also had to deal with our own internal tensions.
See,
when you're campaigning, it can be very easy to spend all of your energy looking inside. There's a lot of internal politics and personalities in campaigns. Like, it's really hard, but we have to continuously re-establish that we have to look out and talk to the people outside, and fighting is part of all of that. But you have to focus on your objectives, and create an alternative vision. And we done that, and we focused on that. We got a lot of help with that. Like, the Rossport is an important campaign for us, because they, to some extent, at very important times, they acted as mentors to us. So when we were facing, we'll say, money coming into the community, there was one group that took 20,000 off Tambourne, and we went and we asked them what we should do, and they said, don't fight with them. And we were ready to launch a massive attack, but we didn't, because we were advised by people who should know not to do it. And you know what? Nobody else took money. So the oil and gas industry's money didn't get into Menor Hamilton. And the people who took the money, who took it on the basis that there would be no strings attached, didn't open the door for money. So that was very important, I think, because when they couldn't get in their money, then they couldn't have their influence,
Yeah.
So as a community, we got to figure it out without that added in, which was probably the difference between winning and losing, I think, and it was a simple piece of advice that came from another community, so we always talk about what happened in Rossport, because I don't think we could have won our campaign without their experience.
Yeah, and Rossport is the community in County Mayo that fought the Shell pipeline originally, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it was such a long campaign. This documentary is what, 12 years in the making, Johnny?
Well, it's exactly 10 years to the month that we kicked off in Drumshambo. It's I think it might have been the 12th of May or the 14th of May or something like that.
Yeah.
It was very, very close to like 10 years. And it goes on. But I think just before we move on, maybe I'll just add to what Eddie said, that this strategy now there were 20 groups. I don't know if I list them at the end of the film, but we don't kind of interview them all. It wasn't possible to do that. And both Eddie and I were involved in the group Love Leitrim. And Love Leitrim took a kind of an approach that, well, listen, how will we get the community on board? And it was in this way, which was the notion of positive campaigning, which is that the word no was not going to be part of our vocabulary, if you like.
Yeah.
We would celebrate what we had, the fact that, like, the incredible landscape, the fact that we had a kind of burgeoning tourism industry, agriculture. This part of Ireland is where for suckler rearing, which is young cattle, which are then sold on to people who have better land down the country. But it has an important part in the overall agricultural sector in Ireland. So that approach allowed people to get involved in a way that was natural to them. So the tractors, the farmers came out in tractor rallies, and the fisher folk came out with their boats and paraded through Enniskillen, and maybe through Manorhamilton, but definitely through Enniskillen.
Yeah.
In a cavalcade with their fishing boats. And
I remember it well. Yeah.
and artists who aren't great necessarily at joining political and sticking with political struggles were able to get involved and take action in a way that was natural to them, and dancers and all sorts of people were able to take their part in and that's a kind of a campaigning that's more often associated with countries which are repressive countries, where people aren't allowed to come out and protest. I'd seen it kind of operate in South America, where people would be essentially shot at, or if they went out and protested with placards. So we were adapting that kind of approach, which also had a community development approach at a time, as you've indicated, when the community was on its knees because of the crash, because of the economic crash. So it turned into something that was really affirmative and character building for the place.
Yeah, but I'm so curious as to how your relationship with a film project like this, or any creative endeavor, changes over the course of a 10-year period, because obviously you've had the will to see it through and complete it, and we're glad that you did, of course, but like it must have been some journey from 10 years ago until now this month.
No, I mean, there's part of it I enjoyed. Kind of, I should say, like, I don't know if Eddie did this at all, but I did take a kind of a rest, I feel like, around, I know when I went back to document the events of 2014, for example, Belcoo, what happened in Belcoo, I wasn't involved in that. So it may have been because of work, or just because the energy of kind of getting things off the ground. I definitely took a back seat, and then I came back in more involved in late 2014, 2015.
Okay.
And was able then to kind of sustain that. Now, I should say, making a film was not in my head at that time. It was about a political campaign, and the idea for making a film, what actually happened was, when we finished in 2017, most of us were in need of a rest, and I definitely kind of pulled back. Eddie didn't, and I'd love to talk about what Eddie then went on to do almost single-handedly after that. And it was only 18 months, I think, after the events of the Irish ban in July 2017 happened, that I actually had the idea to make a film. So it's only about 18 months ago that I actually started to make a film. And that involved going around using some of my own footage that I'd shot, and then making contact with other people who'd gathered footage. And that was kind of a job in itself, because it was all over the place. And then we shot lots of new interviews. And then Eddie had the idea in February of last year, said, listen, I'm going to Pennsylvania, I'm going to New York, do you want to come? And luckily we took the offer to go. because that really kind of gave a whole other dimension to the film. I hadn't intended to. I didn't think we were going to be able to afford to do it, but we just bit the bullet, and we just got the film shot. We finished in New York on the 10th of March of last year, which, if everybody knows, is the time that the lockdown happened. So we just got in ahead of the door being shut on us.
Amazing. So you've managed to, so what you're saying is, by having the opportunity to go to Pennsylvania, to go to North America and do all that stuff, it brought it to life in a new way, essentially.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Because we were able to show what fracking would actually entail. And hats off to Eddie for kind of really just keeping going and just saying, come on, what about it? And we had a really great trip. We got to travel in March of 2020. Not many people can say that.
Yeah, you were thinking local and acting globally,
Yeah.
So Eddie, do you feel like your relationship to the project has developed or changed over that time as well?
Well, when you live in a gas basin, you have to win. They only have to win once, we have to keep winning. So just because we have a very good legislative ban, it's probably one of the best in the world. Our definition of fracking is very strong. That basically you can't break rock under the Republic of Ireland for the purposes of extracting petroleum. So that's a very strong wording. But legislation can be changed. And we see Trump follow Obama, even though it was Obama that drove fracking everywhere around the world. You can see that things can get worse. So we weren't happy when we got our ban. So this campaign hasn't really stopped for us, because we know that we have to ban fracking everywhere before really we can settle.
Yeah. So that's something that I wanted to ask you both about as well, because I get the distinct impression that this battle is far from over, and that the present day situation is far from where you would want it to be in terms of making sure that these communities remain safe from this threat.
Well, like Fermanagh is under application from Tamboran right now for a fracking license, and they're making, actually they're not making the statements. They've always been quite honest with us for some reason, for an oil company, or a gas company. But I think that was because they wanted to promote, they were a small company and they wanted to promote their project to somebody like Shell that might buy them. I can't tell you that for sure, but they were quite honest in the beginning. But now we're seeing politicians in Northern Ireland making claims that this won't include fracking. So and what that means is that the first well won't include fracking. It doesn't, and it's a terrible thing that it could be so cynical. But we see claims being made that the license applications for fracking in Northern Ireland, that initially mightn't include fracking. But Tamboran have been very clear about what they'll need to do. So the threat hasn't gone away at all in the north,
So hold on, Tamboran, the fracking company, Tamboran Resources, has got a license in.
No, not yet.
Right, they've got a license. They're applying for a license. Yeah. Right, so they've got an application in for a license. So the fracking company, Tamboran Resources, has got an application in which they say won't involve any fracking.
No, they're not saying that.
Oh.
So they're saying that their first well, and that they won't use fracking. They'll use some other technology. In other words, they can explore and find out what's down there without high volume hydraulic fracturing.
I see.
But nobody uses high volume hydraulic fracturing in exploration. High volume hydraulic fracturing is used in the commercial production. So we've always seen this type of language, misuse of language. In other words, telling lies by the politicians and the companies that want to promote. So technically they're not telling lies, but really it's a lie.
Yeah.
And in some ways, Eddie, there's a certain corollary with what Shell did in Mayo. They would progress the project on and break the planning permission guidelines and really force the regulatory authorities. They would get to a point where it would be impossible to tell them to say no to them. So they could drill in Fermanagh, they could do their horizontal drilling and call it a conventional drill. But they could then turn around and say, listen, we found gas in large amounts, but we cannot commercialize it without using fracking. And who could then tell them no?
Well, it's worse than that, Johnny. If they're not allowed to frack at that stage, they'll sue for the value of the gas, which is the real game here. It's always about upping the value of whatever you're doing. So if you can't get, like Tambourne aren't going to take out gas, they're only interested in moving the project forward so that they can sell on their sell something, And if they can sell it to somebody that can go into court, that's even better. So it's about stepping forward slowly, managing opposition and moving on. So there won't be any fracking in Fermanagh because the people in Fermanagh won't allow it. We've seen that in 2014, but yet the company still keeps moving forward, and they are moving forward in the process, and at the moment now there's research happening which has been carried out by Hatch Regeneris, which is a company that comes from Alberta in Canada, the center of the oil and gas industry in Canada, and they are going to promote and sell the idea of fracking now in Fermanagh. And it's going to, every piece of evidence that they create is going to be used to sue the Northern Ireland government if they try to stop fracking.
So it's still a real and present threat.
Yeah.
Yes, and just because I alluded to it earlier on, the company, the same people behind the development of the Mayo field, if I'm correct, Eddie, are the people behind Tambourne now. So that strategy of developing the regulatory framework, getting the permissions, and then selling on, which is what they did in Mayo, as Eddie says.
Carl Prendeville was the guy who started off in Mayo, and he's still, I think he's still involved with Tambourne, but he was involved with Tambourne up until very recently. I presume he's still there. Tambourne have gone very quiet. They initially they came and they spoke to us, and they were, they ran a lot of public meetings, and in fairness, that's probably why we got it stopped, because a lot of other companies, especially in the UK, say absolutely nothing. They refuse to engage. Yeah. But they tried out this idea of saying that they were going to, make us all rich, and they wanted to be our friends. And they said, blame the government. We're just a company. We're just a contractor. And we said, you're right. We won't fight with you. We'll blame the government. So we went and we changed the law. And that was the best piece of advice that they gave us.
Yeah. So did this happen, or did it attempt to happen anywhere else in Ireland?
County Clare was also licensed, but it was a different company in Clare, and it was never progressed. But there was also a project near Carrickfergus, which was ostensibly a conventional drill, but which is probably the closest we've come. Eddie, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but it's probably the closest we've come to fracking getting a foothold in Ireland, because we knew that even if that was a conventional drill, if they had found oil or gas in that drill near Carrickfergus, which is in a highly sensitive, all the water, the reservoirs for Carrick and for Belfast were located there. It was
just down the hill.
Permission, but we knew that if they'd found gas or oil there, that they would have had to use fracking in order to commercialize that field, Unfortunately, it was a dry drill, if I'm correct, Eddie.
So it can't happen. I mean, there's still that threat that you talked about, but it can't happen in the traditional sense in Ireland now. There's that very strong law. My understanding is that there's a moratorium on fracking in the UK, or at least in England at the moment.
Well, there was an election in England, and Boris Johnson thought he was going to lose a few seats, so he said that there'd be a moratorium. And then it turned out then that moratorium was based on some concern about some earthquakes. So it's very limited and it's regional. So we do see, I think it's Cheshire. I think that there is some exploration going on in the UK. So it's just about saying there won't be any fracking for now, but we're going to continue with exploration. So we have to be careful when we win, because when we win, it's an opportunity to quieten the campaign, to get people to go back to sleep, people that are tired, you know. And in reality, our campaign in Ireland was far too strong to allow fracking in. But when they give us a ban in the Republic, that halved the size of the campaign. So it meant that the people now in the north are fighting on their own. So how do people in Leitrim keep fighting when we fracking banned? You know, so it's these strategies. You have to keep winning, and you have to keep. You're never safe until everybody is safe.
Yeah.
But I think it's an interesting point, because I mean, what's kind of emerged when you kind of stand back and reflect a bit on it, which you have to when you're making a film, is that it was really quite a unique cross-border campaign. I don't think there's been anything of this scale in terms of an all-island campaign, dare I say, since the hunger strikes back in 1981, which was very much a kind of a national campaign. If people remember back to that time, this is obviously a campaign of a different nature, but it has been an all-island campaign. And, we work as closely as possible with people in the north, including with people in the legislature in Belfast, So we don't, we obviously there is a border there, and there's sensitivities, but we see ourselves as operating very much in an all-island basis, and because we have to. The Shannon rises in Fermanagh. If the gas field is opened up in Fermanagh, that compromises the Shannon, So,
Johnny, I can remember standing in the middle of a forestry in Woodburn beside Carrickfergus with a man called Billy. And the two of us were chatting away. He'd have been a local farmer or a local person. And I remember him saying to me, how are we going to stop this? And like, we were standing on a road where every flag had a Union Jack, and I was wondering where in the world I was, I knew I didn't cross any water to get to where I was, but there I was in the middle of this forest with this community, which was predominantly Protestant, and we were all working together to try and fight these companies. And like, when my parents were always talking about people that they knew in Cashel and in Fermanagh, but the border, when the border came, it closed off those relationships between people in Leitrim and people in Fermanagh. But we generated an awful lot of that through the anti-fracking campaign. So we can go comfortably into Fermanagh now, into houses, and chat people, and it's been very positive from that regard. We really have reconnected with Fermanagh because of fracking.
Yeah, well, it's exactly the kind of campaign that goes beyond those old divisions, because it's something that's so forward looking. There's no, when you come together as a community of people that live in a space to fight an environmental cause like that, or something that affects the area that you all live in and depend on, then you're thinking of your own interests, but you're also thinking of generations to come interests. You're thinking of how to protect a place in perpetuity, and that goes beyond like Catholics and Protestants and one side or another of a completely different fight, I think.
Yeah, there's a good question in the chat there, Gerry, from Madeline about the campaign in Fermanagh. Like, for example, Fermanagh and Omagh District Council were not going to make a submission to the current research process. The councillors, a bunch of councillors, forced the issue under community pressure. And if I'm correct, Eddie, the DUP abstained. So they were constantly dealing with, the old struggle, impinging on what should be an issue that unites people. It's everybody's environment, as Diane says in the film. But yet that issue really is impinging on the community's ability to respond. So if that answers Madeline's question, I think,
the situation in Northern Ireland is kind of difficult to explain. So at the moment, there's this idea of a moratorium in Northern Ireland that you mentioned, Gerry, but that's a moratorium until research is completed. Now that research is going to be completed in the next week or two. So that moratorium really doesn't count anymore. But now what we have is we have strong political support against fracking, but the British government is now redefining what fracking is. So we don't know what that strong political support actually means. But what we have is I think we have kind of silent support for an oil and gas industry in Northern Ireland that doesn't include fracking, which they will define, and to not include, so that they can continue with exploration. So the political establishment is interested in finding what's down there, even though they know that will lead to a fracking industry. But it's not popular. So we had this situation in the Republic as well, where the government was saying, oh, we won't do this if it's bad, but we'll give out these licenses and everything will be fine. So what we'd like to see is to test that. And so Sinn Féin were bringing forward a bill to ban fracking, but now we see Arlene Foster has resigned. We expect there probably will be an election quite soon in Northern Ireland, or definitely we don't expect to get through the full term. So there's a climate bill progressing through Northern Ireland. Now, 2 or 3 weeks ago, Spain put a ban on fracking into their climate bill. So the real test for Northern Ireland is to see if a ban on petroleum licensing, not a ban on fracking, a ban on petroleum licensing could be put into the climate bill in Northern Ireland. And what that would do is it will tease out whether this silent support for an oil and gas industry is real or not. And hopefully we'll see something move on that.
And just as regards, there's another question in the chat, like what the current kind of geopolitics are about fracking. I mean, there was an expectation that Biden would come in and stop fracking. Now, obviously, they made certain commitments in Pennsylvania, and because the vote was so close in Pennsylvania, and they made certain concessions there. But he's not stopping fracking, even though he's talking big about the need to deal with climate change, to the US re-entering the Paris Climate Agreement. But fracking, it looks like, will continue in the States. So therefore the fracking industry will continue. But we know the fracking industry is not self-sustaining in the US. It needs foreign markets, not just for its gas, but also for its technology. And that's where Ireland has been a target for importation of fracked gas from the US into Shannon, into Cork harbours, and into also in the north in Island Magee. There's a facility envisaged for Island Magee in the north. So that's also something, and it was after much pressure was put on the existing parties in the government here a clause is put into the program for government promising to develop a policy to stop the importation, to ban the importation of fracked gas from foreign sources, mainly the US gas that was going to be coming into Shannon, not just for the Irish market, but for potential redistribution into Europe. So that we're also actually very active on that front. So what Love Leitrim is doing next, which is one of the questions in the chat, is that's one of the things that's exercising us, is getting our government here to put that ban, to write that policy, and ideally to put that policy banning the importation of frack gas into law. So there's a lot happening at the moment on a number of fronts.
Brilliant. So far from a closed book, far from a finished story, but it's hopeful, really, in the sense that if this climate bill does progress in the north of Ireland, then there's hope that the thing can be shut down there.
Yeah,
as well.
I think it'd be great to hear Eddie talk about something that he's dragged us all into, which is something that he says in the closing moments of the film, which is Eddie standing outside the UN building, March 2020, and he says, we're on our way in to meet the Assistant Secretary General of the UN, who's with responsibility for climate change. It'd be great to Eddie to talk, because it went live. What he was talking about there has gone live here in the last 10 days. So maybe Eddie would mention something more.
So it actually started, I didn't start this either. Andy Giorgio probably played a huge role in this. Was a Food and Water Watch campaigner from Germany, and he's been fighting fracking with us in Ireland since we started. But so there's a group of campaigners around the world that have had this idea about 2 years ago to look for a global ban on fracking. So back at that time, we signed up as well. They got about nearly 500 signatures calling on the UN to bring forward a global ban on fracking. So because our legislation is so good in the Republic, I was asked to go and meet them because I was associated with that legislation. So that was a huge honor to go over to the UN and be able to challenge them. But in fact, at that meeting, we were challenged. And what happened was that Satya explained to us that they can't ban, they can't call for a global ban on fracking, that it needs to come from the member states. So we discussed which country would be the best country in the world to bring forward such a resolution that would call for a global ban on fracking. And what we understood was that because Ireland was not only banning fracking, but was going to ban the import of frack gas into our energy mix, that we were clean and able to stand up on the global stage and say, this is wrong. We don't want to do it. We don't want the gas, and we think everybody should not do it. So we decided that day that Ireland would develop a resolution. So we worked together to develop a resolution. And now we've presented that to Simon Coney and Micheál Martin, and now we're asking them to raise that at the UN. And we will have the 50% or just over 50% support that we need to get that through if it's raised from Ireland. So right now, Eamon Ryan has been asked to advise the Department of Foreign Affairs on that issue. So if we'd expect that Eamon would be on side, given that he's in the Green Party and he has said that he'd like to do that. We hope. So we have over 200, I think we're at 270 groups now signed up globally. So we're asking all the grassroots movements around the world. So small groups like Love Leitrim, like Bell Crew, Frack Free, like all these tiny little communities, like we represented in our film, around the world, for them to sign up and call on Ireland to bring forward this resolution. And then we're going to ban fracking everywhere. It's hard to believe that a little place like Leitrim could start such a thing or end fracking, but they came to the wrong place when they came to the west of Ireland.
Very good. Very good.
You know, we're a small community, but we, you know, what we also show in the film is that we're quite a disparate community. We're people of quite very different political hue. And we've got politicians at a local level of different political hue to work together towards a common aim. And those politicians in turn convinced national politicians to act. So, I mean, we're not unique in terms of a community here. There's certain qualities that are unique, but communities everywhere have that potential if they just take back the power, if you like. We experienced a power vacuum in Ireland at that time, and we took back the power and were able to articulate and then have an impact. But that is in the gift of many other communities to do that. And we only have so much time to act on the issue of climate change. And we can all do it in our own way.
Well said. Well said. Well, look, Johnny, Eddie, thank you both so much for joining us. And if anyone is interested, and I hope that you are after this conversation, Groundswell is available on the Irish Film From Home platform until the end of May, until the 3rd of June, in fact. So you can watch it there right now if you're joining us in the month of May 2021. watch.eventive.org/Irish Film From Home, or visit irishfilmlondon.com and find out more information about it there. We hope that it's seen far and wide, and we hope that we see more of you in the future, Johnny and Eddie, that your campaigning continues and the great work that you're doing gains more success. Thanks so much, both of you guys.
Hope to see you in London.
I do too, yeah. I hope to see us both. Maybe at a march.
Eddie knows London well also, so we'll have to get over there.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Everybody from here knows London.
Yeah.
Great stuff, guys. Thanks so much.
That's it from us here today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this chat educated and inspired you as much as it did me. We wish the best to Eddie and Johnny on their future projects. And remember, you can catch this documentary along with some other fantastic short films, all for only £5 on Irish Film From Home. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Simply search for Irish Film London on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. A final thank you to the Irish Emigrant Support Programme and Culture Ireland, who've been brilliant supporters of ours for years. The Irish Film London podcast is produced by me, Niamh Brannigan. Our interviewer today was the head of Irish Film London, Gerry Maguire. We're edited by Owen Bill Cliff, and our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again very soon.